reactant problem is a reaction in which you have too much of some reactants and not enough of another reactant. So the best way to probably illustrate this is just by using a simple analogy. So let's say we're going to make cheese sandwiches. We can imagine that our reaction is 1 slice of cheese reacts with 2 slices of bread to produce 1 cheese sandwich. So our stoichiometric ratio is 1 to 2 to 1. Now again, just as in a chemical reaction, the ratio is particles or pieces. So our particles could be molecules, our particles could be moles, or particles could just be pieces of cheese and bread. So 1 slice of cheese reacts with 2 slices of bread to make 1 cheese sandwich. Well, does that same ratio work for mass? In other words, could I have a 1 to 2 to 1 mass ratio? Could I say for every 1 pound of cheese, it reacts with 2 pounds of bread to make 1 pound of sandwiches? Of course not. The stoichiometric ratio is always pieces or particles, not mass. Okay, so let's say then, for example, we didn't have the exact 1 to 2 ratio of reactants. So we have 3 slices of cheese and 8 slices of bread. Okay, well, how many cheese sandwiches could we make? Well, for every 1 slice of cheese, it takes 2 slices of bread. So I use up 1 slice of cheese and 2 slices of bread to make 1 sandwich. And then I use up another slice of cheese and 2 more slices of bread, make a second sandwich. Then I use a 3rd slice of cheese and 2 more slices of bread and make a 3rd sandwich. Okay, so we made 3 sandwiches. Well, notice we still have some bread left, even though we used up all of the cheese. Okay, so what reactant did we have an excess of? Well, we had more than enough of the bread. So bread is called the excess reactant. Again, the reactant you have more than you need, that's the excess reactant. What reactant did we run out of that limited our sandwich production? Well, our 3 slices of cheese ran out first, and that limited us to only 3 sandwiches. So therefore, cheese is called the limiting reactant, because the 3 slices of cheese limited us to only 3 sandwiches. So the limiting reactant is always the one that's completely consumed or completely used up. And it's called that because, again, it limits how much product we can make. So in our example, the cheese ran out first. So those 3 slices of cheese limited us to making only 3 cheese sandwiches. Therefore, cheese was the limiting reactant. Let's do an example now with chemistry. So in our reaction here, they say, how many moles of water can we make from 6 moles of hydrogen and 4 moles of oxygen? Okay, so if we mix together 6 moles of hydrogen and 4 moles of oxygen, how many moles of water can we make? Well, we're going to do the calculation twice. First, I'm going to take 6 moles of hydrogen, see how much water that lets me make. Then I'm going to take 4 moles of oxygen, see how much water that lets me make. So let's just try it out. So 6 moles of hydrogen. Okay, well, I'm trying to relate moles of hydrogen to moles of water. Well, I see from the stoichiometric ratio that for every 2 moles of hydrogen, I produce 2 moles of water. So I'll put 2 moles of hydrogen on the bottom and 2 moles of water on the top. Okay, so I can work that out. And that shows me that for every 6 moles of hydrogen, I can produce 6 moles of water. Okay, well, how about the 4 moles of oxygen? Well, 4 moles of oxygen, and I want to relate that to water. So what's the ratio between oxygen and water? Well, for every 1 mole of oxygen, I can produce 2 moles of water. So I need moles of oxygen on the bottom. So 1 mole oxygen, 2 moles water. So we cross that out. So now that lets me make 8 moles of water. Okay, so our question is, well, how much water would we actually make? Would I make 6 moles of water? Would I make 8 moles of water? Or would I perhaps add them together and make 14? Well, we always make whatever was the smallest number. So in our case, we're going to make 6 moles of water. Again, if you think back to our cheese sandwich analogy, I had enough cheese to make 3 sandwiches. I had enough bread to make 4 sandwiches. But I had to make whatever was the smaller amount, which was 3. So what was the limiting reactant? Well, the hydrogen here limited me to making only 6 moles of water. So what was the excess reactant then? Well, there was plenty of oxygen to keep going and make up to 8 moles of water. So oxygen is the excess reactant. So again, the 6 moles of hydrogen limited me to making only 6 moles of water. But there was enough oxygen to make 8 moles of water. So hydrogen was my limiting reactant and oxygen was my excess reactant. But you'll notice though here that even though there was more moles of hydrogen, that was still the limiting reactant. So you can't just look at the initial amount of the reactants. You have to actually solve it in terms of one of the products to see which one actually limits. So even though there was more moles of hydrogen than oxygen, hydrogen still wound up being the limiting reactant. And oxygen, which there was less of, actually wound up being the excess reactant.